Vate to give you the background of where we are as far as that goes from ICAO's point of view or anyone else's point of view at the moment.
Sure, we'll go to Dr Navate, but I'll just repeat, as I think we've discussed before, Mr McCormick, that when I have given young people an instrument rating, a command instrument rating, that award is given to them for 12 months on the basis of their demonstrated performance on a day or within a check and training system. It is no guarantee of their performance tomorrow, and that is quite an accepted risk process that the aviation community has undergone. Dr Navate, welcome.
Bhushan Navate, Principal Medical Officer, Senator. The point which you made about flight tests and the difficulty of tests identifying people who have got colour vision deficiency, but not identifying people who may or may not be fit because of that colour deficiency to operate in an aircraft was very true a few years ago. In around 10 years ago, the UK CAA, in addition with the local university, undertook a project to identify the specific colours which are important to aviation. This was a three-phase project. The first phase was to look at the important colours outside the cockpit. The second phase was to identify the colours inside the cockpit, for which they used an Airbus and a Boeing cockpit. And the third phase was to identify a test which would separate people who had abnormal colour deficiency from those who had abnormal colour deficiency but who were not colour safe. So that was the intent of this project, and that is how the CAD test has been developed, Senator. So what the CAD test does is to specifically identify those colours and people who are able to meet the colour requirements for aviation. As a result of that, about a third of the people who have previously failed tests like the Ishihara or other colour vision tests have now been able to pass the CAD test and are operating safely. As a result of that, in many jurisdictions in the world, it is the primary test which is being used. In Australia, it has been proposed as being the tertiary level test if a person is unable to unable to pass the Ishihara or the Farnsworth Lantern test. Now, what you mentioned about the use of a flight test has been done in some jurisdictions, and they have been criticized for the difficulty of standardization. The big difficulty about a colour vision test is it's an input disability. When we are looking at an output disability of, say, for instance, a restriction to an arm or some sort of amputation or some output limitation, that is easily correctly assessed, like performance is assessed in a flight test or in a simulator test. The difficulty with trying to do that with an input is that you do not know where is the break in the link. Is it because it wasn't picked up? Is it because it wasn't bright? Is it because there was distraction? There's a whole host of factors involved in that, as also inter-operator and inter-tester variability. So that's been criticized in the US as well, where they used medical flight tests. And there's a recommendation in the US which came out of a study last year suggesting that if a person fails the initial clinical test, the second test should be a precision test, such as a CAD test. So the research which has come out in the last 4 or 5 years has changed the complete picture for that, and that's why the attitude is moving in that direction, Senator.
Could I just raise a procedural issue with the guidance of the committee? We're going to do air services tonight. How much time do we need?
I've probably got another 15 to 20 minutes, and I believe they'll be adequate for air services.
So,
this is your one, mate. Don't look at me. I'll put them on notice.
oh yeah, Senator Smith's got a couple of questions for air services. So we'll say 25 we'll go to air service.
Okay. Dr. Navate, there are two confounds with that approach. One, a very simple example. In my past at military college, they used to have language aptitude tests, a theoretically derived test, and our counterparts from countries in Asia weren't normally sitting those. A Chinese origin Singaporean student sat the test, failed dismally, was told he had no aptitude for tonal languages. The similar confound for you is that pilots who have been safely flying for tens of thousands of hours have failed the CAD test and yet have demonstrated in not just one test, but multiple check and training tests with multiple instructors, their ability to safely operate aircraft. And so if the contention that Mr McCormack made, that CASA approach this on an individual capacity basis as opposed to one rule, then you can't discount the fact that a theoretical test will not necessarily determine an individual's ability to use other cues to operate an aircraft safely. You mentioned that they looked at internal and external lights. It is a proven fact that in aircraft that are modified for night vision imaging systems, where all the emitted light is filtered with something like a BG7 filter, that the colour hierarchies are completely disrupted, and yet aircrew and fixed-wing and rotary-wing aircraft, normal colour pilots, quite safely operate those aircraft in terms of interpreting that internal information. Likewise, external information. The human body adapts, things like hyperstereopsis. It, for years, was said that that would make it impossible to fly, and yet the body adapts to that. And so what you're seeing in the cases of this pilot, one of whom I understand you attempted in 2009 to actually not renew his medical, but subsequently gave it back to him to continue flying as a captain in an ATPL situation, has not passed the CAD test, but demonstrates that he as an individual is able to competently fly an aircraft by day, by night, in IFR conditions. And so my question to CASA is, from a point of view of procedural fairness and natural justice, is it a good use of the taxpayers' money to take these issues through to well over $100,000 in an AAT hearing when there are proven methods of establishing the competence of an individual to operate an aircraft?
If I could, Senator, I think we don't know what the sum of money involved is, but we'll go with what you're saying at the moment. The overriding principle here, whether it's colour vision deficiency, hearing deficiency, any sort of impairment on the pilot, is safety. At the moment, to go towards an ATPL when there is no standard to which we are aware of which ATPL is issued anywhere in the world, to go to that situation for what would be the benefit of a number of pilots, I think we're talking a few hundred pilots in total. I agree, they should be able to do the best they can in their career, but our responsibility is to maintain the safety of the Australian travelling public. And when we get to the point of view where we are pushing the boundaries, where we're pushing the science, looking for other ways to get around what could possibly be indicated from the clinical side that is a dangerous thing to do, then we're starting to impact on my ability to discharge my duties under Section 9 of the Civil Aviation Act, and that is to provide safety as it is outlined in that Act. Now, if we wish to go there, then we have to go there in a measured manner. We will not go there on one basic flight test, and I'm sorry, we will research this as much as necessary, and with all due respect, I will not be issuing an ATPL to a person who fails the test as outlined in 67. Those who already have their licence and have their privileges, we intend to do nothing with them. We will say to them, we are writing to them, as I mentioned to you the other day, to say to them, if you've had some change in your vision, or if you think something's changed to affect you, then perhaps you should discuss it with your own doctor or with your own DAMI. I agree we should move forward, but we are already way out in front of half the world, if not 3/4 or all the world, and as we move forward, we will do it at a measured pace. When O'Brien goes through the AAT, we will see what the AAT has to say, what their decision is, what their preferred decision is, and that will give us the basis from which we can move forward, whether it be in practical tests or whether it be in clinical tests or whatever combination is required. To do it now unilaterally would be dangerous.
Can I take you...
Mr. Rule, you need oxygen. You appear to have glazed over.
No, I'm
You're
quite
all right.
all right, Senator. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hey, what about me? I
Thanks,
haven't got
Chair.
oxygen.
Mr McCormack, can I take you then, if you're concerned about Australia moving ahead of the rest of the world, to both the retirement age of pilots and also CASA's world-leading work in the area of pilots suffering from depression who are able to fly while being treated with SSRIs. Now, in both those cases, Australia was well ahead of the world.
I agree.
Australia ended up not saying we're ahead of the world, therefore we shouldn't go here, but in fact Australia took that information to the world, and now the world has changed its retirement age and it's changed its approach to SSRIs based on what Australia has done. Now, the point that I want to raise with you is that if you look at how Australia established a research base to justify that, it went back and it looked at pilots who had been flying over a 10-year period whilst medicated, and the evidence, the outcomes, as Mr Navanthe correctly points out, you're looking for, were incident and accident reporting. And so if we've got now 25 years of flying, just like CASA sponsored a study to go back and review the safety outcomes, and the measures were accidents and incidents, and on that basis concluded that Australia should go to ICAO and the world and say this is a valid and safe way forward, then that is where we should be spending the money to go back and revisit the safety case. Because if we count up the number of accidents that have been attributed to people with mental health issues, they far outweigh the one accident, and even that is disputed, where colour vision was a factor. And certainly if you look at the record of Australians flying, there is a long history across a broad range of roles where that has been proven. Now, if we've done that with SSRIs, why is CASA not taking that approach of using the data we have, and we're the only nation in the world with that data, just like we were with SSRIs, to prove that the world's thinking, based on theory, around CVD does not reflect the reality?